have a distinct pleasure this evening, or afternoon, of having with us I feel one of the most exciting and interesting scholars that we have available to us. Zecharia Sitchin was born in Russia and raised in Palestine, where he acquired a profound knowledge of modern and ancient Hebrew, other Semitic and European languages, the Old Testament, and the history of archaeology of the Near East. He attended the London School of Economics and graduated from the University of London, majoring in economic history, a leading journalist and editor in Israel for many years. He is a member of the Israeli Exploration Society, the American Oriental Society, the Middle East Studies Association of North America, and he's here today. His 4 books to date, under the overall title of The Earth Chronicles, have been widely published and republished in both hardcover and paperback editions, and widely translated into many languages, including German and French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Dutch, Swedish, and Japanese. The scientific advances since the publication of the first book, The 12th Planet, in 1976, have confirmed many of the innovative and pioneering theories and conclusions of Sitchin's books, attesting to the accuracy of Sumerian knowledge 6,000 years ago. The first book was followed in 1980 by The Stairway to Heaven, and in 1985 by The Wars of Gods and Men. Book 4 of this series was just published February 1990, and it's called The Last Chronicles. Lost Chronicles. Lost Realms, I'm sorry. Encompassing the ancient events and civilizations of the Americas. I'd like to welcome Zecharia Sitchin.
Thank you.
Speak a little louder than normal, if we can't hear you.
Okay, good afternoon. Just let me hold up the 4 books to convince you that I deal with facts and not with fiction. There are 4 books. And the 5th one is due in October.
October?
It will be titled Genesis Revisited, and it will deal with the scientific advances in the 14 years since the first book was published, and show how modern science corroborates ancient knowledge. I assume that many of you have, if not all, have read one or more of my books. Have you? And one idea that occurred to me, thinking about what to say this afternoon, was whether I should really give you, the audience, the podium, and just listen to your questions and build what I have to say around your questions. Is that a good idea?
You have my attention.
No. You'd rather hear me talk. Well, I assume, having said hello or been approached by some of you since I've arrived here, I assume that each one of you had some point in his life, his or her life, where an event or a thought or an occurrence or hearing something or seeing something made you interested in the general or overall subject of this conference, whether we call it UFOs or extraterrestrials or ancient astronauts or other phenomena. And I thought that I should tell you how I became interested and involved in the subject, which launched me on writing the 4 books to date and coming and talking to you. And it goes back to my school days. I was born, as you heard, in Russia, but I grew up in what was then Palestine, and was privileged to study, to learn the Bible, the Old Testament, in its original language, Hebrew. And that is extremely important to understanding what actually those ancient texts tell us, because everything else that you read in the Bibles, be it in English or in German or whatever language, are not just translations, but are really interpretations, because each translation, each translator puts into the translation their understanding of what the word or the sentence or the event had meant. And as a matter of fact, if you compare, even in English, various editions of the Bible, you will see that in many respects they don't agree with each other. So having had the privilege of learning the Bible in its original Hebrew language was extremely important to the future course of events. Now, we began with the book of Genesis and reached chapter 6. I don't recall how old I was then, but maybe 8 or 9 years old. And we reached the story of the deluge, the great flood, and the story of Noah and the flood and what happened is preceded in that chapter of Genesis with several very enigmatic verses that somehow don't belong to the rest of the story of Noah and the ark, and that are evidently some kind of remnant from some longer story or another chapter that was lost or omitted somewhere and so on. And these enigmatic verses begin with a statement that many a preacher has used on Sundays, because it is known as the verse that says that those were the days just before the deluge, when there were giants on the earth, or upon the earth. And they married the daughters of men and had children by them and so on. And I raised my hand and I remembered that as if it happened yesterday, although it happened more than 2 years ago when I was 8. And I said, excuse me, teacher, but why do you say giants when the word, the Hebrew word, is Nephilim, which literally means those who had come down from heaven to earth? And he said, Sitchin, sit down. You don't question the Bible. And as young as I was then, I came home and I was, upset. I was boiling inside because I was sure that my question, when I raised my hand, I did not question the Bible. I was reprimanded wrongly. I questioned a translation or an interpretation of a word in the Bible, but I did not question the Bible. On the contrary, I questioned why a word or a statement or a term in the Bible is not accurately translated or interpreted. And this became an obsession with me. As I grew up, I became interested in archaeology. I studied the languages of the ancient Near East and so on. And always in the background, always underlying what I was studying or doing was this question, why did the Bible use the word Nephilim to describe those who, again, literally are called in those verses the sons of the gods. Sons plural, gods plural, literally translated from the Hebrew. And why is there such a distinction made? And the fact is brought out as something to be remembered, to be appreciated, that they married the daughters of men. In other words, they were somehow different. They were not the sons of men, they were sons of the gods. Elohim in Hebrew, plural. And this inquiry, this research, has led me to a realization that many scholars have by then, and indeed it began in 1876, when the discoveries of writing of clay tablets in Mesopotamia reached the stage where the writing could be deciphered and read and understood. It dawned on the scholars more than a century ago that the biblical tales of Genesis, of the creation of what is called the heaven and the earth, of what is really a course of evolution, how life began on earth, how the dry land separated from the oceans and life began. That the story of how the Adam, which literally means the earthling, not Adam, but the Adam, was created. That the reference to some deity, again, the term used is plural, Elohim, says, let us make the Adam in our image and after our likeness. And again, the plural is used all the time. That the story of the deluge and the story of the Garden of Eden and of the Tower of Babel, that all these tales are really, in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, are really abbreviated, even edited versions of much longer tales, written down for the first time in a country, in a land called Sumer, in the correct spelling and pronunciation, Shumer, which meant land of the guardians, in southern Mesopotamia, which is today's Iraq. And it was realized that a civilization, the first known civilization, a very high civilization, had suddenly blossomed out in that area. And the scholars use words to the effect that suddenly, unexpectedly, out of nowhere, and so on and so forth, there's blossomed out a civilization that really had everything that we would consider a prerequisite or a symbol or an aspect of a high modern civilization. And in this sheet, which I think most of you have, rather than show slides, I've reproduced some of the illustrations of actual archaeological artifacts discovered and of actual ancient pictorial depictions. And the one marked A is that of a Sumerian lady, and that takes us back almost 5,000 years. And you can see her elegant dress, her demeanor, her nobility, if you want, and I'm sure she could compete in dress and demeanor with any elegant lady today, and that is 5,000 years ago. The one marked B is of another Sumerian lady, and I chose it to show the elaborate hairdo, and If we could go back again some 5,000-6,000 years, I'm sure many of the ladies here would want to know the name of her hairdresser. Illustration C is, for some reason, tilted, because if you turn it this way, it really depicts, it's part of a scene of a medical scene where a group of medicine men surrounds a patient. The patient lies on, on a table and wears a mask and is clearly treated with some kind of radiation. And again, this is from thousands and thousands of years ago. Now, the Sumerians can be credited with virtually every first in human civilization that we can think of, whether it's the use of the wheel, whether it's high-rise construction, whether it's the use of the brick, whether it's metallurgy, whether it's knowledge of chemistry, medicine we have covered, whether it's the concept of laws, the concept of courts, of justices, even of juries, the concept of a king, of a parliament, or an advisory council. Anything you can think of, any aspect of a high civilization had its first in Sumer, going back, as I said, 6,000 years ago. Mathematics, the beginning or the first calendar. As a matter of fact, as I've not necessarily mentioned in the books, but in some articles, the concept of a calendar, of a year divided into 12 months, of a lunar month, of a solar year, not only goes back to Sumer, but one calendar still in use, and that's the Hebrew calendar, is exactly the Sumerian calendar, and the count of years in the Hebrew calendar goes back to the year 1 of the Sumerian calendar, so that is still in use today. So all these aspects of a high civilization began in Sumer, again suddenly, unexpectedly, out of nowhere. And among the thousands or tens of thousands of clay tablets discovered there, and if you'll excuse me, and the cameraman will excuse me a minute, I want to show you something. Many who have read the books or who heard me talk or read other books heard about clay tablets, but I wonder how many of you have actually seen one. And this is a typical one. The size was such that it could be held in the palm of the hand of the scribe. It was soft clay, not entirely wet, but soft enough to make on it symbols with a stylus in writing that has come to be called cuneiform. And the scribe would have the stylus and would make these symbols. And when this clay tablet dried, or if it was a very important document, it was fire dried, it became a permanent record of the document or the tale or the text or whatever was written on the tablet. And I've once observed that people say, well, that's a very primitive way of recording or of writing or of keeping things, writing them down. And I say, well, I'm being taped, I'm being videotaped. Would you think that those tapes would still be readable or available in 6,000 years from now? but this is. So who was primitive and who isn't is debatable. And there are many depictions, and many of them, a small part, but many are reproduced in my books, and the question is, how were they obtained? Now, the Sumerians were the first to invent the rotary press. They took a stone, a very hard stone, mostly a semi-precious stone, and engraved on it what they wanted to depict in reverse, as a negative. And then they rolled it on wet clay again, so that the positive image became imprinted and was again preserved the way these tablets were preserved. So this is an example of one. This happens to be in silver. So they had nothing that we didn't have, in a way. Now, one of the most amazing aspects of Sumerian civilization was their knowledge of astronomy. Indeed, every aspect of modern astronomy, the basis of modern astronomy, which is the concept of a celestial sphere surrounding the Earth, of a circle with 360 degrees, of a zenith, of a horizon, anything you can think of, including, of course, the division of the heavens into 12 houses of the zodiac, though most people, if asked, I'm sure, would say the Greeks began it. Not so. The Sumerians did about 3,000 years before the Greeks. Every aspect of modern astronomy was known and was devised by the Sumerians. Literally thousands of tablets dealing with astronomy were found, and in the basements of most major museums in the world there are tens of thousands of tablets that have not yet been deciphered because there's simply not the manpower or the people who know enough to read and understand. I'm, for example, one of 200 people who can read the Sumerian writing, 200 people in the whole world. So there are tens of thousands of tablets yet to be read, deciphered, transliterated, translated, and it's a very tedious process. But among those that were dealing with astronomy, there were many that, for example, list stars, list constellations. Virtually every constellation that can be seen in the northern skies today was listed by the Sumerians. Some tablets give distances between the planets, extremely accurate distances between the planets. And the question is not only how could the Sumerians know that or measure those distances, but I ask the other, perhaps more logical question is, what for? What did they need to know the distances between the planets if they lived in some corner of the earth called Mesopotamia? And they dealt at length with our own solar system. And they kept insisting that the family of the sun has 12 members. And they listed the sun, the moon, and 10 planets. Now we know today about 9 planets, starting from near the sun, Mercury, then Venus, then Earth, and so on, and ending with Pluto. We know about 9, bearing in mind that Pluto was discovered only about 60 years ago. Until 1930, Pluto was unknown. And if you would ask a gathering then how many planets are there, you will be told 8. But they insisted that besides the sun and the moon, there are 10 planets. Now, lo and behold, and though everyone until about 2 centuries ago, or less, 150 years ago, was sure that the ancient people were not aware of, could not possibly be aware of any planets beyond Saturn, because they could see planets only with the naked eye. Presumably they had no telescopes or other means of observation. That the Sumerians not only listed the other planets, but, as I have made clear in several articles and other appearances, they not only knew that beyond Saturn there's Uranus, and beyond Uranus there's Neptune, but they described them exactly the way our latest spacecraft, Voyager 2, has found them to be. Twin-like, blue-green in color, with various patches on them, and watery. Now, the fact that the Sumerians referred to those planets as watery was considered by astronomers until about 2 years ago as sheer nonsense, because we know that there could be no water out there. Everything is frozen, and besides, the outer planets are made up mostly of gas, and they are not solid, and so on. But the Voyager spacecraft showed that they are watery. And again, the question is, how could the Sumerians not only know about those planets, but even describe them? There was another interesting aspect, and that is that the Sumerians numbered the planets, and they referred to Earth as the 7th planet. Now, we consider it the 3rd because we say, starting from the Sun, there's Mercury, Venus, and then Earth. But they said, no, Earth is the 7th planet. And thinking about that fact too, it occurred to me that only somebody who is coming from the outside in would call Earth the 7th planet, because Pluto would be planet 1 and so on. Mars would be the 6th and Earth would be the 7th. And then it turned out that the Sumerians said there's this planet and that planet and so on. And there's one more planet, the 12th member of the solar system, which they called Nibiru, meaning planet of the crossing, and its symbol was the cross. So even the symbol of the cross is not a invention from 2,000 years ago, but from 6,000 years ago. And they said that that planet, Nibiru, originally did not belong to the solar system, that it was an invader who was coming from outer space, was pulled into our system by the gravitational pull of the outer planets as it passed by them, ended up colliding with a very ancient planet which they called Tiamat, split Tiamat in two. One half of it was smashed into pieces, which, as I've later shown, I think convincingly, became the asteroid belt and the comets. And one part, which remained intact, half a planet, was shunted into a new orbit and became Earth, pulling with it to the new location in the heavens, the chief satellite or chief moon of Tiamat, which became our moon. It was about to become a planet in its own right when these events occurred, and therefore the Sumerians still considered it a member of the 12-member family. And the question was then, which of our known planets is Nibiru? Scholars who have come up and read and deciphered and explained those ancient astronomical texts, and I must say that they were scholarly geniuses, because they combined both outstanding knowledge of astronomy with knowledge of Sumerian and other ancient languages, and the ability to read and understand those ancient tablets. Some said, well, the way it's described, its location in the skies, when it's seen from Earth, it must be Jupiter. And when it is in that position, then others said, well, it's probably Mars. And those who said it's Mars were called, idiots by the others, because how can you say it's Mars when it's obviously Jupiter? And the others called names the others because it couldn't be Jupiter, it's obviously Mars. And I was stuck in between, and for almost a year I made no progress on my first book because I said to myself, what or where is Nibiru? And then I must tell you, since I think this audience will appreciate it, one evening, very frustrated, I went to sleep, and I said out loud to whoever, and I said, Nephilim, those were the guys on account of whom I was reprimanded at school. I say, if you exist, please tell me, what is Nibiru? And I woke up in the middle of the night with the answer. It is one more planet that when it comes to our neighborhood, passes between Mars and Jupiter. And then everything from that morning on fell into place. And I realized that the texts tell us that it is a planet with a vast elliptical orbit lasting 3,600 years, arriving between Mars and Jupiter, which means near us, every 3,600 years, at which time there are comings and goings between their planet and our planet. Now, I'll jump ahead a little and tell you that astronomers in the last few years agree with the Sumerians and with me that there is one more planet in our solar system. They refer to it as planet X. X meaning the unknown planet, and X meaning 10, because not counting the sun and the moon, the number of planets is 10, so we know of 9 there's one more. And they have more or less pinpointed its location in the heavens. There's reason to believe that in some ways they have confirmed its existence, although they don't have yet photographs of it. And if and when, or rather when, this fact is acknowledged, and there is no great eagerness to acknowledge it. Because, and by the way, all the astronomers who are dealing with it are very well aware of my writings and what the Sumerians have said, and we exchange letters and telephone calls and so on. So what I'm saying may be news to you, but not to them. Because when in 1930 Pluto was discovered, it was a very exciting event, and astronomers were enthused. Textbooks had to be changed, but it really made no difference to the man in the street, to me, to you. Okay, so Neptune is not the last planet out. There's one more called Pluto, or named Pluto. But the astronomers today realize that if they confirm the existence of one more planet beyond Pluto, they not only confirm Sumerian knowledge of the complete makeup of the solar system and the fact that there is one more planet out there, but they then have to deal with the other issues that run more or less in the following circle. If the Sumerians were right about the makeup of the solar system, how could they know that? And the Sumerians said, we know it, they wrote it, we know it because those who had come from that planet to Earth have told us so. They told us we are the seventh planet. They described Uranus and Neptune to us. They described their planet to us. So, confirming Sumerian knowledge regarding planet X, or the 10th planet, or the 12th member of the solar system, would require facing the issue of the veracity of the other things the Sumerians have written down. And that is that on that planet there had existed hundreds of thousands of years before our civilization, a civilization with people advanced enough to travel in space, to come to Earth, and to do all the things that the Sumerian texts and the Bible tell us that they have done. If you go on and look at the sheet that I gave you, they, for example, depicted some of those whom the Bible called Nephilim, and whom the Sumerians called Anunnaki, which literally meant those who from heaven to earth came, which is the same as the Hebrew Nephilim. For example, D, E, and F are depictions of one of their females. It is known that D represents the goddess known to the Canaanites and in the Bible as the goddess Ishtar, and she liked to roam in the skies of Earth, dressed as a pilot. Perhaps she foresaw World War I and wore the goggles of a pilot of World War I. Another life-size statue. I wonder if I could get some water. The E and F are a life-size statue found on the Euphrates River in the site called Mari. And you can see that this so-called goddess is wearing a kind of a helmet with earphones and has a hose for perhaps breathing support purposes. Those who piloted the spaceships had for official occasions, wore a dress that made them look like eagles with artificial wings. And an interesting thing about it is that I'm sometimes asked, how did they look? Did they look like us? And I say, absolutely no. We look like them. And because they made us in their image and after their likeness. And as you can see, thank you, they really look like us because we look like them. And there are various depictions of the eagles. L is an imprint of a cylinder seal, which shows on the upper left-hand corner the complete solar system, which is the sketch M, and you can see by comparing it to our knowledge of a solar system, the N. It has all the planets we know about, plus one more between Mars and Jupiter. I mentioned that the planet Nibiru was depicted, its symbol was the cross, and I have here a few depictions of how it was symbolized with the cross. And the O is an illustration of its vast elliptical orbit. And I also have here under K, a copy of a depiction from an Egyptian tomb, the tomb of the governor of the Sinai, which shows a spacecraft, a missile, underground, with its module above the ground, where you can see palm trees and giraffes. Now, some of you should have another sheet which out of the goodness of my heart I gave out without keeping a copy for myself. Thank you. And that perhaps is to illustrate to you the link between the Sumerians, the biblical tales of Genesis, and what happened in great antiquity, in ancient times, and the principal subject of this conference, which is UFOs. I'm not a UFO expert in the current or modern sense of the word. I've never seen a UFO. I've never been abducted. As a matter of fact, I don't think that UFOs exist. Because UFO stands for unidentified flying objects, and I don't think there is such a thing. You may think, or you may be unable to identify them, but those who operate them or send them, they know what they are. But since I believe in the veracity of the Bible, I always, when asked or when pressed to answer the question, what do I think about UFOs, I say, well, let us imagine that the door there opens and a young man bursts in, and he's very excited, he's short of breath, and he says, just stop all the proceedings, I must tell you something, you wouldn't believe it, but it happened, let me tell you what happened. And he says that he was hiking from Trenton to Philadelphia, and he got tired, it got dark, and he lay down to sleep in the field. And as he was sleeping in the middle of the night, he was suddenly awakened, not by noises, but by very bright lights. And he looked up, and he saw some kind of a flying saucer, let's call it, hovering. The doorway was open. He could see light inside. There were some beings, some men, standing at the doorway. He could see his silhouette. There was a kind of a ladder coming down from the hovering craft, reaching the ground. And there were beings, men, going up and down that ladder. And he was so startled and shocked that he fainted. And when he came to, there was nothing. Did he imagine it? Did he dream it? Now, what would we think? Did he imagine it? Did he dream it? I think that he really saw it. And I therefore believe that he saw a UFO, what we would call a UFO. And therefore, whoever believes in the Bible has to have an open mind about UFOs, because that young man was Jacob. And that was the so-called famous Jacob's dream. Now he did not call it a UFO. He knew what it was, because he put up a commemorative pile of stones there, and he called it the house of God, and he said, I didn't know, and that's in the Bible, he says, when I lay down to sleep, I did not know that this place is a gateway of the gods, a place from which they can go up and down. So he knew what he had seen. There are, of course, other tales in the Bible. There is the tale about the prophet Elijah, who was taken up to heaven in a fiery chariot. And I therefore draw your attention to some of the ancient depictions of divine beings, gods, astronauts, whatever you want to call them, in what I would prefer to call flying saucers. I frankly like that old name much better than UFOs because it describes what people see rather than say, you can kill me, but I don't know what it is. And I put a caption under the one at the bottom because, as you can see, it depicts this being definitely in the skies among the clouds in a kind of a flying saucer or a disc with flames coming out of it. Now, there were all kinds of flying vehicles seen in those ancient days. One depiction, all these are ancient depictions, none of them are my own drawings. You can see on the upper left-hand side a rocket-like vehicle in the skies with flames coming out of its tail, which was launched from the ancient Cape Canaveral, located in the Sinai Peninsula. There were what we would call helicopter-like or vertical takeoff vehicles that could fly and then land with extended legs, and these two with the bulbous ones with the extended legs and with the eye-like openings or light fixtures, I don't know exactly what they were found, drawn, painted on a wall, like in a mural, part of a mural, in a place called Tel Gasul, which is on the east side of the Jordan River, exactly where, according to the Bible, the prophet Elijah was taken up to heaven. Now, whether these were the kind of vehicles that took him up, we can speculate, but that's where these drawings were found. Now, as a matter of fact, the people in antiquity had idols made that are called by scholars eye idols, and I have reproduced here some of them. You can see they were all with some kind of a conical shaped head and with very prominent eyes. There were also other statuettes, which I show in the center on the right-hand side, the whole body, again with this conical head and funny eyes. And I think that these ancient depictions, not only of the different kinds of spacecraft or UFOs or flying objects that the ancient peoples have observed, but also of the so-called idols. I have looked through many UFO books on UFOs for some clear drawings of the spacecraft or of the beings that supposedly occupy or man them. And I must tell you that the clearest ones I found are in the ancient sources and not in modern depictions. I think my friend Antonio, who knows, is out there in the back and who spoke yesterday, uses some of these illustrations from ancient times to illustrate his lectures about UFOs today. And I think that when one asks himself, what really is this UFO phenomenon today? Because the only ones who could be the source of spacecraft from extraterrestrial sources are not beings or astronauts from some star system that is so many light years away from us, and nobody could travel such distances. But are they Nephilim or the Anunnaki from our own solar system on a planet that is well on its way back to us? But as we have seen before, they don't look like that. And I therefore suggest, I have no evidence for it, but I suggest that what really people who say they see those UFOs and their occupants. If it's true, then what they see are really robots, androids, humanoids, who are used as scouts to man scout ships in advance of and ahead of the day when that planet would be again in our vicinity, and when the Anunnaki Nephilim themselves would come again and fulfilling the prophecy about messianic times, or in the New Testament about the return of the kingdom of heaven to earth. Thank you.
I'm curious with what you've been talking about Genesis and some things in the Bible. I would imagine that you've looked at literature from the Kabbalah and things of that sort. I'm wondering if you would address that, particularly with regard to the Elohim and the legends about the Shekinah.
Well, if you have read, or if not, I hope you will read my books. I'm basing myself on archaeology and on the text in clay tablets. The writings of the Kabbalah are from the Middle Ages, and I'm not there yet. I'm still in ancient times.
I understand the Hubble telescope will be placed into orbit soon. Do you know if there are plans to try and photograph the planet Nibiru with the Hubble telescope, and if the astronomers will be able to get all they learned from that telescope to the American public?
Well, the answer to the first part of your question is yes, and as a matter of fact, some of those dealing with the pinpointing and photographing of what they call Planet X are not waiting for the Hubble telescope because of the delays in launching it. Whether the results, or rather, whether and when the results will be made public is, your guess is as good as mine. Please.
Yeah. I don't know if that microphone is working, is it? Oh, it isn't. No, okay. I have a question about the Nephilim seem to have a very reduced role over the years. Through your books, they seem to be less and less involved in our affairs, to the point that they're seemingly not around now. I was wondering if you could expand on what you think the current relationship is. Are they coming back pretty soon? Oh, okay. We just got to work. Thank you. Got to work. All right.
At the risk of repeating myself, it's my understanding from your books that the role of the Nephilim in our lives, or of Homo sapiens, has been gradually reduced over the years in terms of overt control, switching over to a more covert control, to the point where seemingly they're not around at all. But you're talking about they're coming back, and I think it's like 1,600 years with the next flyby is expected.
I didn't say that.
Oh, okay, but I'm just trying to do my own arithmetic in terms of the last time it came by. I was just wondering what your speculation is on the current relationship between the Nephilim and Homo sapiens.
Well, I think you really, by describing a factual situation, you answered your own question. At the very beginning, when they brought us into being through genetic manipulation, they created servants or slaves, really, to work in the gold mines and then to serve them in other ways. That has changed as a result, or in the aftermath of the deluge, the great flood, when they made mankind more or less a partner to being and living and staying on this earth. Each turn, each 3,600 years, in the past they gave us more civilization. If you follow the advent of human civilization through Paleolithic and Mesolithic and Neolithic and domestication and so on, the intervals are always 3,600 years. And obviously each time they decided, with the exception of the attempt to wipe us off the face of the earth during the deluge, but after that they decided that we merit more knowledge, more civilization, and in a way to be more on our own. What they did the last time around, whether they left entirely and whether any of them may have stayed here, or what kind of relationship they established with all of mankind or with some of mankind, are very complex subjects. Not only that they require more study of available documents, but they lead to very serious theological and other problems, and therefore I have left the discussion of what I think happened and what will happen to the last book in the series, because it is then that I will be stoned, not from drinking, but stoned. So,
When can we expect that book?
well, when do you think I'll be stoned? It'll come. Yeah, thank you. But it's a very, very thorough